All right, everybody, welcome back to Coach's Corner. Today, you're stuck with me. I'm Amber Artiaga, and I am the VP of Student Support here at campus. And I'm so excited to be welcoming in one of our educators here at campus, Professor Avery Blankenship, who has been working with our campus scholars for quite some time. And today's focus is going to be about empowering your learning and helping you prepare for those one-on-one sessions with both your tutor and with your instructor. So our topic today is maximizing your tutoring experience. And we've got the perfect person to be able to share with us today. Professor Blankenship was both a tutor here at campus as well as currently a professor with us. And so we're just excited, Professor Blankenship, to have you with us today. And so I'm just going to jump right in. So if you're watching this, please be sure to take some notes. I think it's going to be really helpful for you as you plan on having a very successful quarter here, or quarters here at campus. So with that, Professor Blankenship, welcome. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So I guess my first question for you is just around kind of maybe if you can share a little bit about your own educational journey as you've gone up through your own educational experience.
So as far as college goes, I went to a dual enrollment high school. And so I started taking college classes when I was in 9th grade. The purpose of the school was that you would go to high school for 5 years instead of 4 years, but then graduate with an associate's degree. So I took classes at a community college since I was like 14 until I was about 19, and really just learned a lot about myself as a student during that time. I think attending college classes while I was in high school kind of really emphasized for me how different college classes are from high school classes, and just how much, in a college setting, you have to be the one driving the bus, essentially. And so thankfully, because I went to that high school, I graduated with 2 associate's degrees and was able to skip all of my general education classes when I transferred to a 4-year school. And so because I had a full scholarship to go to a 4-year school, I ended up double majoring in English and computer science. And then after finishing undergrad, I moved to Boston and got my master's in English and a graduate certificate in digital humanities. And now I'm working on my PhD in English literature. So I've, dabbled a bit in both the humanities and the sciences, and a lot of my research in my PhD program involves using some of the skills that I learned as a computer science student to, analyze enormous sets of text, for example, using computer coding and all that sort of good stuff. So, I'm very grateful that I started off at a community college, because it really sort of forced me, when I moved to a 4-year school, to kind of go in very sure of what I wanted to do. And it helped me be a lot more selective about with the classes that I was taking, which is the only reason why I was able to complete 2 degrees at the same time when I was in doing the 4 years of undergrad.
Gotcha. Gosh, so being so young and starting college classes, did you, because our topic obviously was around how to make sure that we are getting the most out of those sessions. And did you have any guidance around okay, if I go talk to my professor and I'm confused on something, but sometimes students don't even know how to articulate what they're confused about. Did you have any guidance around that, or was it kind of trial and error for you?
It was a lot of trial and error. And I think that's one of the features of campus specifically that makes it such a great program, is that there is a lot of guidance, both, at the community college, at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, at the PhD level. There's been not a ton of guidance. It's just kind of like trying something out. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, keeping it moving. I think, my whole college journey has been for many, many years at this point. Yeah. And so yeah. I think I spent a lot of time in high school really trying to figure out what the difference was between a high school setting and a college setting. And the longer I took community college classes, and as I went through high school and slowly started taking on more and more college classes, I really understood that the type of personality or like the type of like rigor that's required in a college setting versus a high school setting. It's just very different. And I think the sooner you can learn that those two settings are very different, the more you can sort of take control of your education and make the best use of your time being a student.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. And I think, what would you say, like, what, as you look back on that experience, what your initial thought was around, like, what does it mean to be a college student versus what you discovered? What would you say is the biggest difference between going from a high school setting to a college setting in terms of the
Mhm.
student's role in the learning, if that makes sense?
So, I mean, at least when I was in high school, in the school that I went to, we didn't get to decide what classes we took. We were just kind of given a schedule. We didn't really have like individual advisors. We had just one school counselor, but there was a lot more, not like hand holding, but a lot more of like, there was like a set path in high
Yeah.
school. And if you fall off of that path, there's a lot more intervention to try and get you back on the path when you're in high school. Whereas when you're a college student, you are really responsible for getting yourself through a program.
Mhm.
And there isn't as much of like one set path when you're a college student. Like there's many ways that you can go about completing a degree, and you're so much more in charge of what your education is and what it gets to mean.
Yeah.
Whereas, at the high school level, you're just kind of like puttering along, trying to like grow up while you're also,
Right.
like,
Right.
just you have to take the math, you have to take the art, you have to take the history, so on and so forth. But then when you get to the college level, like, yeah, you have general education classes, but you're also like deciding to take classes in subjects that interest you, and deciding for yourself how you're going to take advantage of the time that you have there. So it's much, much more self-driven. And it took me a really long time to figure that out.
Yeah.
I think when I first started taking college classes, I just kind of expected the teachers to be similar to high school teachers and to just like be doing a lot more of that hand holding. But I very slowly figured out that a part of the joys of being a college student is like you are responsible for showing up to like tutoring or to going to office hours. Like no one's going to force you to do those things. And so once I figured out eventually that it required me sort of stepping up and taking charge of my education, then I was, by the time I got to a 4-year university, I was able to, sort of hit the ground running and waste a lot less time kind of fumbling around.
Right. That's huge because I think it's an understatement to say that going from that high school environment to the college environment creates this space where there needs to be a higher degree of self-efficacy. You
Yeah.
need to be able to reach out to say when you need help, right? Um, and so if you're coming from an environment where you're used to, well, the teacher said to do this and I just do that and regurgitate whatever they told me to do, versus like,
Yeah.
no, I need to challenge you on, I'm not, the way you're explaining it, I'm not understanding it. Here's the part I do understand. Here's where you're losing me. That takes
Yeah.
like a lot of like self reflection and things like that, and kind of self awareness to know how to come to those sessions prepared to ask the right questions, right?
Mhm.
So as you have been working with campus students and things like that, what are you seeing as some of the things that you're finding that students who are getting the most out of their office hours, or as working with tutors and things like getting the most out? Are there common themes that you see that have helped serve those students and them really being able to be successful academically?
Yeah, I think things that I've seen in my own students and things that I've like noticed in myself is that like the tutoring session is not the time for you to reflect. If that makes sense. Like you
Yes,
you
yes,
reflect before you come to tutoring,
yes, yeah.
and so I think if you're wanting to make the most use of like, okay, I have borrowed 30 minutes of this person's life, then
Mhm.
I think you
Yeah,
should go into a tutoring session already understanding what it is that you don't know, right? And
yes.
like I think ultimately, something that I tell anybody that I mentor is that like shame is a useless emotion to have as a student
Mhm.
because it just stands in the way of understanding, right? Like
Yeah,
you're in school to learn. And for most people, like you're dedicating quite a bit of your time and like time that you'll not get back by being a student. And so you kind of owe it to both your instructor, but mostly to yourself, that you go into a tutoring session already kind of decided how you're going to use that time and using it to the most maximum benefit possible.
Yeah.
So you should go into a tutoring session already having questions to ask and not using that session to figure out what the questions are. Because ultimately, if you do that, you leave the tutoring session obviously with more questions than answers, which is never a good position to be in, leaving a tutoring session or an office hours session.
Right. No, that's huge. And the thing is, it's not to say that that first part of just like really understanding what you know and what you don't know isn't a critical part of the process, but it might not be, like you just shared, it might not be the most appropriate space to be able to digest that in the tutoring session. However, that's what your peers are for, right? That's a great opportunity to download with, your other students. It's like, okay, I didn't get this part, really to help get clear, because sometimes I understand that sometimes students have to talk it out, right? Like to really understand, like, okay, what part I get? When did they say that part? Oh, I didn't get that part. So really having those peer groups, those peer connections, to kind of think through some things. And then to your point, by the time you come to the tutoring session, now or you can even go to your peers, ask like, okay, what question how should I be phrasing this question so that you can get the most out of that experience, right?
Like you shouldn't be embarrassed to ask questions or to be confused, because like probably the most valuable skill that you can acquire as a college student is being comfortable admitting when you don't know something. And the whole purpose of tutoring or office hours or whatever is that like this is your education. And so what you come out of the program knowing and what you come out of the program not knowing is up to you. It's not up to anything else. And so I think, like being willing to admit when you don't know something and like actually being able to verbally express that rather than saying like, oh, I just don't understand, but not specifically what you don't understand or like specifically what your questions are. Because like if you're asking a question, there's a 9 out of 10 chance that somebody else in the class also has that same question. And so it's a good idea to either talk with your peers or maybe like get together, and if everybody has the same confusion, maybe tell the professor that, like everybody.
That's confused. A novel idea, right?
Yeah, it's especially an online program. It's really hard as an instructor to get the sense if lessons are like hitting home or if they're not, if nobody asks questions. And so I think you should ask questions, and you should ask a lot of questions. It's just that you have to get to a point where you're comfortable not being embarrassed to ask questions and not being embarrassed to ask very specific questions. So if you're confused about something very specifically, you should just ask that question.
That's a really good point as well, because I think there's some embarrassment that comes with that. And there's also a degree of vulnerability, right? To be able to like kind of raise your hand and say like, I don't really understand this. And so part of that is really having good relationships with your professors, with your TAs. So that way you feel like it's a safe space to feel comfortable and feel vulnerable in. And to your point, like it's about having the language to really express what part of whatever concept it is that you don't know, because the professor, the TA, they can't read your mind. So to come to a session and just say, I don't understand. Okay, what part of this do you not understand, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean when I say like the tutoring session is not where you reflect. Like you should go in with specific questions in mind, because otherwise you spend the entire session that you've scheduled or whatever just trying to figure out what it is you actually don't understand. And then by the time you actually figure that out mid-session, like you've already used half of the session time just trying to arrive to what you're not understanding exactly. And so you make the best use of your time when you prepare for a tutoring session, just like you would prepare for attending a class,
right? I know so the saying is to really understand whether or not you really understand something is to have to teach it to someone else, right? And
Yeah.
so when it comes to a tutoring session and where students are trying to get clear on maybe what part of a concept they're not understanding, that peer engagement of like potentially downloading or debriefing with the peer or teaching it to them, like, here's what I understand, what part am I missing? Is there like as you think back on your own education, when you were preparing to either go to office hours or tutoring sessions, was there any type of kind of strategy or formula that you use to be like, say, like, okay, here's what I want to walk away with by the time I'm done? Was there any kind of formula
Mhm.
that you used?
Yeah, so for me, I was always terrified to go to office hours, even though I knew
Mm,
logically that like there was nothing
yes.
to be afraid of. There's
Yeah.
still this feeling, like especially when you're in like a in-person school,
Mm-hmm.
like this feeling of like, my professor's looking at me from behind her desk and
Mm-hmm.
like, oh man, what if I ask the wrong questions, or what if I say the
Mm-hmm.
wrong thing, or
Yeah.
like what if the biggest fear I had as a student was like, what if I ask a dumb question, right? But
Mm.
like, it's impossible to ask. Like,
Right.
you just should already take that off the table, right?
Yeah.
Because like your professors want you to understand. Like that's the whole
Mhm.
reason why they have the job that they have, is because
Right.
they want to teach you things. And I think for me, what was really important, because I got so anxious and nervous in office hours, was I would come to office hours already knowing exactly what questions I wanted to ask, and I would also come with specific examples of the thing I was confused
Yeah.
about. So like,
Mhm.
maybe I don't know how to ask a super specific question, but like, here's an example that we went through
Mhm.
together in class that I don't understand,
Got
right?
it.
And like for me, that was specifically useful in math classes, because I'm so
Mhm.
horrible at math, and like so much of taking math in undergrad was like really me learning how to humble myself and to like
Yeah.
really know how to ask for help.
Mhm.
And so much of actually getting help was me bringing specific examples and having specific questions, and not being too scared to ask them. And so I think it's always a good idea to come with questions and examples of the question that
Yeah.
you're asking, or the examples of the thing that you're confused about.
Mhm. I love that because like you can then to some degree it helps with bringing some clarity into what students are understanding, what they're not, because you can take specific things that happen during the lecture and say like,
Mhm.
okay, in this lecture you said X. I was a little confused about what X meant, right?
Yeah.
So I think it helps with just kind of crystallizing what part of the concept they understand, what part of the concept they don't
Mhm.
understand. And then I think too, it requires that the student have a little bit more ownership of their learning, right? Which is also the goal
Mhm.
of this experience. Is it's not just like you mentioned earlier about going from high school where it is more of a obtain the knowledge to um, demonstrate, like, regurgitate it back. I know
Yeah.
these things. Whereas when you transition to college, it is more of like, yes, I've now not only have I grasped this knowledge, but I have taken the time to run it through my own experience. And now I'm going to share
Mhm.
with you what this means for me and like in my context, right? So
Mhm.
that's a different experience, different skills. And it takes time. And to your earlier point, like about like feeling like I don't want to ask a dumb question. And that's the whole reason the instructor is there, is to make sure that you do have clarity. The question, I think, and the other part of this is I think in everywhere else, and I love your take on this as well, but it feels like when you think about adult students in
Mhm.
most other parts of their lives, you do have to look like you so their jobs,
Yeah.
other environments that you do have to look like you know what you're doing, right? And so you spend
Mhm.
80% of your time in a space where you need to show competency and look like you know what you're doing. But then you come into the school environment and then it's actually okay. And we expect, because we know that you don't come into school knowing how to cite MLA style. Like, we know that. Like,
Yeah.
and so when we expect that you would ask questions, but all of a sudden you have to take down that guard of,
Mhm.
oh, I know how to do everything. So,
Yeah.
like, are you seeing that? And I've noticed that a little bit too, like where students are a little just intimidated about just even
Yeah.
coming to forget being prepared for it, knowing that it's available, and even coming
Mhm.
to office hours, because then it's like especially in this virtual environment, there is no back of the classroom. You can't just sit in the back and hope they don't call
Yeah.
on you or hope, right? You're face to face now. Are there ways in which, because you mentioned that you had some challenges with that and as you were going through your education as well, are there some ways that you like emotionally, or like we know, like kind of getting the questions down, having examples? Were there any things
Yeah.
that you did that just kind of help you like mentally prepare for like, this is a conversation I'm going to have?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to like releasing yourself from shame. I think
Mm,
by virtue of being a student, for me, it was really critical to understand for myself that actually I don't know anything. Like that's why I'm
yeah.
taking the class, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I think like the point of a classroom is not for you to show up and like show off everything you already know,
Right.
because
Show
otherwise, why
mastery.
would you
Right.
be there?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you should just go into any college classroom already understanding that not only do you not know anything, but nobody else
Mhm.
knows anything.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the whole reason you're in school. And I
Mhm.
think what's the really critical difference when you transition into college that I think takes some time to adjust to is that when you're in high school, unfortunately, the way that the American education system works is that public school, at least, is set up to teach you how to memorize things, right? So
Yes.
you're not actually
Yes.
being taught to learn or to
Mhm.
understand. You're being taught how to regurgitate answers,
Mhm.
right? And so something like office hours in a high school environment is taught to be like a punishment. It's a kind of remediation. You go there
Yeah.
because you weren't good enough at memorizing. But
Right.
that's not what education should be. Like
Mhm.
there's plenty of research out there that shows that people actually learn when they're able to do something called knowledge transfer, which means that you
Mhm.
understand something well enough to apply it to different examples than what we're
Yeah.
given in class. That's when you actually
Mhm.
learn to understand.
Yeah.
And because public education at the high school level is so focused on test taking and memorization and regurgitating answers and not knowledge transfer, I think it
Mhm.
can be very intimidating for students once they get into a college environment to understand not only do you now have to be in charge of your education, which you've likely not been, but you
Yeah.
also have to completely change how you understand learning. Right. Because like
Mm.
in high school, you're taught that like, oh, I just need to learn the formula. I just need to learn A equals B, or I just need, but that's not actually learning. And I think
Mhm.
once you get to college, it really challenges any ideas that you might have about what learning is and how it works, which is why a lot of my writing classes, the entire first 2 weeks of class, we just talk about learning, what it means to learn, why we learn, what it means to learn to understand versus learning to memorize. And I think that sometimes even just somebody being told that, right? That like in
Yeah.
high school, you were taught to memorize, and that is why you're struggling right now. I think
Mhm.
sometimes that can be really revelatory for students and can
Yeah.
help them sort of in a meta way reflect on maybe why they're having so many issues in the classroom, because they're going at it with that kind of high school mindset. And I know for me, like because I was in college and high school at the same time, it was really challenging for me to have to like switch between those mindsets so much.
Yeah.
But eventually I figured out like, oh, the reason why I'm having so much issue in my college level math class is because in college level math, you're not just given formulas to memorize.
Yeah.
Like you're not, the quadratic formula is not something
Mhm.
that you're ever going to be tested on.
Right.
It's more like here's like a situation where you now have to figure out which formulas to use, or
Yeah.
have to like apply something that you've learned in class. And it's just a different way of going about learning, and it's a different way of showing what you've learned than
Right.
typically how it's approached in high school.
Yeah, that's so good because the other part of that understand going from memorization to applied knowledge, there's a switch that has to flip in your brain, so to speak, to really understand like how do I make this relevant for me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the context that I currently find myself in. And so want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that inform how that switch happened is our different learning styles, right? Where some are more
Yeah.
visual, some are more, what is it, kinesthetic, where they need to feel and touch things. Some are more
Mm-hmm.
auditory. How much of a role do you think that plays in helping students be prepared to ask for help?
Yeah, I mean, I think Personally, I think that learning styles matter, but they play a much more minor role than understanding what is important in a lecture. And I think a huge part of that just comes from that switch from more like memorization focused learning to applied knowledge learning. Because if you're going into the classroom understanding, okay, this is a class where I'm being taught to apply something, the things that you consider to be important during the lecture changes, right? So if you're going in thinking I just have to memorize something, you're going to hold on to different parts of the lecture than, someone going in saying I need to acquire skills, or I'm trying to acquire something that I can apply later. And I think, like having like a variety of ways or like modes that you present information to students is really important. And in my classes, at least, I incorporate a lot of like videos or like popular media examples of some of the stuff that we've been talking about in class. But I think that at the end of the day, it's much, much more important that you go into a class understanding what it is that what the teacher's trying to get you to see, right? Because that's kind of the whole point of college level learning, is that like the professor has something that they're trying to get you to see. And the faster you can kind of hold on to what that thing is, the more efficiently you can participate in class. Whereas, again, if you go into a college class with that high school kind of memorization, you're more likely to take notes on things that actually don't matter that much.
Right. Well, that's actually another really good point, is one of the critical tools that students have access to as they're trying to understand what's important about that particular course is the syllabus. And so can we talk a little bit about the syllabus and why it's important to actually read it?
My God. The syllabus is like the North Star for your class. You should have it, if not stapled to your forehead, you should have a very quickly accessible link to your syllabus.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that like I feel like students really, really just don't learn until something really majorly goes wrong. Because I know when I was in community college, I never looked at the syllabus. I was like, why do I need to look at a syllabus? Because again, in high school, we had syllabi, but they didn't matter. Right? Because every single day, the professor, or not the professor, the teacher is saying, remember, you've got this due. Remember, we have a quiz this day. Remember, this is what we're learning today. And that just doesn't happen at the college level, because again, like what you're trying to get out of college is so significantly different than what you're getting out of high school. And so I think a lot of times students don't learn how important a syllabus is until they miss the deadline, right? Or until there's a major exam they weren't aware of because they weren't checking the syllabus. And all I can say is that the syllabus is like, even as an instructor, everybody is looking at the syllabus. Everyone, the instructor, the TA, the student. So the syllabus is like the authority of the class. And so you should always check, at least on once a weekly basis, check what's on the syllabus.
Right. It will save your anxiety and stress levels immensely, I think. Yeah, I learned that as well. Same thing. Like, I don't know. I don't remember. I was in high school a really long time ago. I'm assuming we have syllabi, but like, I don't ever remember it in high school. 100% remember. And sometimes they were like, here's the other like trick on this is like, I remember some of my syllabi would be really thick. And I thought like, oh, it wasn't important, but it was thick because they were trying to make sure like they were giving you
understood.
You understood. And two, they were giving you the cheat code, so to speak, on what do you need to really make sure that you pay attention in this course. These are the core principles we want you to walk away with this course. So that's usually the first part of the syllabus, what this course is all about. That's a guidepost in many ways. And I feel like a lot of times students miss out on some like critical information about how to think about that particular course,
I think first day of class, I think a lot of people mark the first day of class as kind of a wash and it's just it's syllabus day or like whatever. But it's like if you're going to refer to that day as syllabus day in your head, you might as well actually treat it like a syllabus day.
Right.
Like probably like, you know, as soon as you get the syllabus, and this is something that mattered a lot for me when I was in college because I was a double major. So, you know, I had computer science exams, but then I also had like English papers due at the same time. And it's very similar to how, you know, the campus program is set up. You are very likely to have a paper due the same week that you have a major exam. And so like the first day of class, you should look at when the major deadlines are and like put them in a calendar somewhere. You know, like for me, I have to have my stuff in a calendar that gives me reminders because otherwise I'll completely forget stuff. And so the first day of class, you should be putting those deadlines into some kind of calendar that notifies you when that deadline is coming up. Because, you know, it's a lot of information to juggle. And, you know, the syllabus is where a lot of professors really sort of theorize what they're thinking about when they're giving you assignments. You know, like I know at least in my syllabi, a lot of times when in the syllabi or in the syllabus, I'll explain like, okay, we're doing this paper because this is what I want you to take out of it, right? Or like, this is the reason why we're doing these assignments. And I think the sooner you can understand, it just goes back to like, the sooner you can grasp what it is the professor is trying to get you to see, the more successful you're going to be in a class. And that includes understanding why you're doing certain assignments. And a lot of that information you just can only really get in the syllabus. And it should be something that you are regularly checking. It shouldn't be just you look at it the first day of class and then you never look at it again. Like you should be looking at the syllabus once a week at least. I would prefer if my students looked at it right before class. But really, like, you know, even when I as the professor forget what we're doing that day, I look at the syllabus. And so I think you should really treat the syllabus as like that is like where all of the information is.
That is the academic contract, right? This is what this you said, this is a due north, this is what we're doing. And it's huge for especially in this environment too, where quarters go incredibly fast. And so what you shared earlier around, because students are taking 3 courses at once, it's very likely that you're going to have a paper and an exam and something else going in the same week. And so that shouldn't be a surprise to you. You actually know, like, especially because we just started a quarter, you actually know that now. If you look at your syllabus, right? You can see these things are coming. And so you can adjust your life and what you need to do to be ready for that. So it's not just like this surprise. I have a friend of mine who like jokes with me. She's like, cause I'm a last minute Christmas shopper. And so she's like, Christmas comes the same time every single year.
Every year.
Every year. There's no surprise. Why are you shocked? Like, oh, it's December 22nd. So it is with deadlines and dates and time management. And for sure, like any of our brand students where maybe you're listening to this and this is your first quarter with us, so everything is like, oh my God, this is a lot. This is a process, right? This getting down your the system that works for you takes some time. And so what works for your friend in class may not work for you, but it is I think it's an environment of a trial and error to figure out what's going to work best for me and where are my strong suits, where am I most strong and where am I kind of weak, and like optimizing for that. Okay, I know I'm going to need a little bit more time on understanding how I want to put my paper together, and I need to really spend some time thinking through that, or whatever that might be for them. I think is really important, and you get that clarity by having experiences and going through the education learning and things like that they're experiencing, and the syllabus for no matter what class, and even here's the other thing, it's like what you just shared is not a campus specific thing. What, like every institution, so when they graduate from
institution ever,
they're like, yes, you just got, like, we just saved you years of anxiety. Hopefully read your syllabus, because every institution, every instructor, no matter the level, they anticipate that you're going to read that syllabus. That's the governing body of the class, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I used to even have a professor in undergrad who the first day of class, every semester wore a shirt that said it's in the syllabus. Because people would inevitably ask questions that are
Yeah.
very clearly spelled out in the
Yeah.
syllabus.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like the one document that you are given ahead of time that can
Yes.
help you, like, not only like, schedule your time better, but like, for instance, if you can see like, oh, okay, I've got a paper due in week 4 and
Mhm.
weeks 1 through 3, this is the topic we're covering. Chances
Yeah.
are your paper is going to be on that
About that
topic. So
topic.
like it helps you,
Yes.
yeah, like it helps you like pay attention in a different way in class. Like instead of
Mhm.
being a sponge that just takes in everything, you're sort of
Right.
being a more like active learner because you're going
Right.
into learning with some kind of purpose or goal.
Exactly. That's huge actually, because and the other part of that is like maybe that's your like that's another great reason to use office hours is maybe that's your
Mhm.
suspicion. Like you saw in the syllabus, oh, I noticed we're covering these things. By chance, are these things that we're going to be covering in the paper? Like, is this what you
Yeah.
want to see? So you can get strategic, very pointed about what you need to take. Because I think
Yeah.
in a class where there's a lot of content that's covered, it can feel overwhelming. Like, okay, what part of this am I supposed to know? Like, which part of this is more critical
Mhm.
than others? And so having those relationships with the instructors, coming prepared for tutoring sessions, looking at the syllabus, all of that is kind of that, I don't know, I'm going to call it an academic ecosystem that you can use to inform like how you can like maximize your learning and maximize all of the
Mhm.
resources that you have available to you, because you've got the instructor,
Yeah.
you've got the TA, you've got your peers, you've got your syllabus, you've got videos, like all these things are at their disposal to really use. And
Mhm.
so it's about how to use them strategically without just feeling like, oh, this is just a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. And when I think at the end of the day, and this is something I tell my students ad nauseum, you should always ask a question before something becomes a problem,
Yeah.
because once it's a problem,
Right.
it's a lot harder to put out a house fire than it is like
Yeah.
a little spark of something.
Right.
So,
Right.
so
Right.
you should just feel comfortable asking questions, and like again, like shame or embarrassment is
Yeah.
just not, like, it's not a beneficial emotion in college,
Mhm.
like it just isn't. And I think you should also like just not write off classes that you don't immediately understand
Mm.
how it's going to be
Yeah.
useful to you, because some of the most useful classes I took in undergrad were classes that I didn't even plan on taking. Like they were classes
Yeah.
that I might have even gone into with a bad attitude. But by the time the class was over, I was like, oh, wow. And like these are the
Yeah.
classes that I frequently just in my day to day life am like, oh, yeah, I took a class on this thing. And now I
Yeah.
can answer these questions on Jeopardy or
Right.
whatever. Like at
Right.
every class that you take is an opportunity, even if
Mhm.
you didn't necessarily anticipate that opportunity,
Right, right. That's something that you will have learned, could serve you really well later, whether it's
Yeah.
Jeopardy or otherwise. That you're like, oh, I think I know a little something about this thing, and so that
Yeah.
exposure. And at the end of the day, it's is really like whether the students really understand the relevance of writing this specific paper and how that's going to help them on the job. It is a portion about how you, how do I say that? It's more about who you're becoming as a result
Mhm.
of having these experiences.
Yeah.
That's really the transformational like learning that's happening, and what you have to like the person that, I always say this, but the person that enters the program is not the person that exits it.
Yeah.
The challenges you face, the obstacles you overcame, and what you had to learn about yourself and other people creates a different perspective than what you were at the beginning of this whole
Mhm.
experience. So I know we've been talking, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do, I'm gonna prepare to wrap this up. But before I do that, just wanted to find out from you, are there, as you look back at your own experiences, as well as your experience now here at campus with our students, are there any
Mhm.
like, not, I don't want to say major, but are there any like cheat codes or biggest things like if that you would want folks to take away from everything that we've been talking about, like that you think would be, no matter what learning style, no matter what background or how much educational experience a person has had, that you think would be most helpful to students? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing to take away is that you are in charge of your education. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what vibe you get from any, like at the end of the day, you're the one driving the bus. And so what you get out of your education is also up to you. And so I think, the sooner you can start to take charge of what your education is going to look like and what it's going to mean for you, the more you can get out of being in a learning environment. And I think that that's something that I've taken, even now that I'm not in coursework, like I'm doing just active research, and I still try to take that mentality of like every day gets to mean what I want it to mean, right? And like it's not anybody else's responsibility. It's not nobody has influence over what my day gets to mean, or what my research gets to mean, or what my education gets to mean. And so I think that can be both very empowering, but it can also be really intimidating. And I think that that's why you should lean on the resources that you have available to you, and sort of use being in college as the opportunity to figure out some of the hard stuff that you just aren't given the space or the time to figure out in the professional world, right? Like college is where you can really explore like what you want your life to be, right? And I think that students who really lean into that and really just like let go of embarrassment, let go of feeling ashamed of not knowing something, and at the end of the day are just willing to ask questions, or the students who leave a program having really taken advantage of the opportunity to have a space where you can try things out.
So that's so good. The part around being the driver of your education, that's huge, because at the end of the day, like what you bring into this environment is, our hope is a willing mind to learn. And we anticipate that going to be varying degrees of exposure to the different types of curriculum and things like that, but the willingness, the openness to be vulnerable in this space so that you can gain what you need to gain, that part is on them. That part is, you do have to drive that openness. We can't force it. We can make all the resources in the world. If you choose not to use them, we can't make you, right? So good. Well, Professor Blankenship, I want to just say thank you so much for taking some of your afternoon to share the insights and the best practices. I think there's a lot of takeaways that folks will find in this particular episode of how to come to tutoring or office hours prepared, and not to be scared, or like you said, shame, like, oh, I don't know something, because guess what? All of your professors at one point in time didn't know what they currently know, right? So,
sometimes I still don't know.
So they've been there, they know it. And a part of the joy of teaching is to be able to watch those light bulb moments come on when you've had a conversation that just lands, right? And so, so definitely for the students that are listening to this particular episode, take advantage of all of the resources that you have available to you. We have some of the most phenomenal instructors here at campus, and we do that for a reason, because no matter what your past experience is like, maybe you did have a challenging experience with a professor, and maybe some of that intimidation comes from that. That's not the case in this environment. And so we just want to make sure that you're locked in a way that allows you to drive your educational experience, that you can be successful and move on from this environment to wherever other space that you're going to find yourself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for this episode of Coach's Corner. So again, thank you so much for being with me today, Professor Blankenship. If there are other topics and things like that might be interesting to anyone watching here, please reach out. We are absolutely open to other topics and things that will be valuable for you. If you're watching this episode and you're not currently a campus student, please go ahead and check out campus.edu and learn more about our program offerings. You can also be sure to visit any of our social media channels to get information about what it's like to be a campus scholar. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again to Professor Blankenship, and we will see you in the next episode of Coach's Corner.